Judge mocks black man in court, regrets it when he turns the tables. Your Honor, are you seriously denying the motion without even reviewing the evidence? Malcolm Rivers' voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. The words hung heavy in the air, defiant but controlled. The kind of calm that only came from years of swallowing injustice whole. Judge Richard Elston leaned forward on the bench, his pale fingers steepled, his eyes narrowed with contempt, thinly veiled as authority. "Mr. Rivers," he said with a derisive chuckle, "this is a courtroom, not a stage. If you're looking for applause, try Broadway." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Even the court reporter paused for half a second before her fingers resumed their clattering rhythm. Malcolm didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head slightly, gaze locked on the judge with razor precision. "I'm here for justice, not applause. But if I have to raise my voice so justice can be heard in this courtroom, I will." Judge Elston scoffed. "You're out of line. One more word and I'll hold you in contempt." And just like that, the trap had been baited. This wasn't Malcolm's first time in front of Elston, but it was the first time he'd walked in with a full dossier on the judge himself. Today, he wasn't just defending a falsely accused young man. Today, he was starting a war. It began that morning when Malcolm adjusted his navy blue tie in the mirror of a courthouse bathroom, knowing full well he was walking into hostile territory. He glanced down at the folder in his hand, thick with affidavits, screenshots, audio recordings. Evidence gathered meticulously over the last 2 years. Elston thought he ruled from behind a curtain no one could pull back. Malcolm intended to rip that curtain down. When he entered courtroom 4B of the Fulton County Courthouse, he was greeted by the cold, institutional hum of fluorescent lights and a jury box filled with indifferent expressions. Judge Elston presided from his bench like a Roman emperor, bored, detached, smug. A man whose black robe cloaked the kind of power that often went unchecked. Malcolm's client, DeAndre Knox, sat beside him, a 19-year-old kid with sharp eyes and a nervous foot twitch. He had been accused of an armed robbery at a convenience store 3 blocks from his home. No fingerprints, no weapon, no surveillance footage. Just the shaky testimony of a store clerk who had once been fined for filing a false police report. The case was a mess. But it wasn't about facts. It was about who society decided to believe. Elston glanced over his glasses. "Mr. Rivers, are we finally ready to proceed, or do you have another lecture prepared?" Malcolm smiled tightly. "We're ready, Your Honor. Though I do hope the law will be given as much room to speak as I am." The prosecutor, Wade Griffith, smirked from the opposite table. Fresh out of a firm that prided itself on keeping conviction rates high and empathy low, he had made a name for himself throwing poor black defendants under the bus. Today he looked far too confident. Opening arguments began. Griffith painted DeAndre as a career criminal, throwing in unrelated juvenile incidents, barely tied to the case. Malcolm objected twice, both overruled. When it was Malcolm's turn, he stood tall, letting silence sit for a beat before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you will see in this trial is not a pursuit of justice, but a manipulation of fear. You'll be asked to judge a young man based on stereotypes, not facts. And if we let that stand, we are all guilty." Elston interrupted. "Mr. Rivers, keep it to the case. This isn't a pulpit." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Malcolm replied, "the law is my scripture, and I intend to preach." The gallery stirred. For the next 2 hours, Malcolm poked holes in the prosecution's case. He pointed out inconsistencies in the clerk's statement, showed phone records placing DeAndre miles away at the time of the robbery, and revealed that the initial police sketch bore little resemblance to his client. But Elston blocked every angle he could, limiting cross-examination time, dismissing key objections. Each ruling chipped away at decorum. But Malcolm remained unshaken. He needed the judge to keep pushing. Then came the moment he was waiting for. "Your Honor," he said, stepping forward, "we have evidence that was withheld in discovery. A text thread between the alleged witness and the arresting officer, discussing how they'd make the case stick no matter what." Gasps. Elston paled, then masked it with fury. "You will not introduce new evidence without my prior approval. This is an outrage." Malcolm raised the folder. "It's not new evidence. It was subpoenaed weeks ago. The prosecution failed to turn it over. This is a Brady violation, and I move for an immediate mistrial." Elston slammed his gavel. "Motion denied." "So you're denying the motion without reviewing the evidence?" Malcolm asked again. "Mr. Rivers, sit down." "I won't," Malcolm said, voice rising just enough to ride the room's growing tension. "Not until this court acknowledges what it's trying to bury." Elston stood. "Bailiff, remove him." The gallery erupted. Half the room shouted in protest. The jury looked stunned. The bailiff stepped forward but hesitated. Malcolm didn't move. He opened the folder and held it high. "This is corruption, Your Honor, and I'm done pretending this courtroom is sacred when you've turned it into a circus. It was chaos, and it was exactly what he planned." Outside, Ava Winston, journalist for Atlanta Truth, was live-streaming the moment from a phone hidden inside her purse. She had everything she needed. Malcolm knew he'd be escorted out, knew he'd probably be held in contempt. But as the bailiff finally moved to grab his arm, he said one last thing. "This isn't the end. This is just the opening statement. Because when systems protect themselves, the only way to break them is to force the world to watch. And tomorrow, the world would." The courthouse buzzed with restless energy the next morning. Word had traveled fast about the altercation in Judge Worthington's courtroom, how he publicly humiliated a defense attorney named Marcus Reed, then threatened him with contempt for calling out a clear Brady violation. But the part people couldn't stop whispering about was what happened after. The way Marcus stood his ground, calm and unshaken, as if he had planned the whole thing. What most didn't know was he had. Marcus sat in his car, parked 2 blocks from the courthouse, tapping his fingers lightly against the steering wheel. He wasn't nervous. He had already calculated every move he would make today. The case was never just about his client, Keith Banner, a 22-year-old black man accused of an armed robbery he didn't commit. It was about the courtroom itself, about a system that let someone like Judge Arthur Worthington sit on a bench for 2 decades with unchecked power. Marcus had been building a file for years, but exposing corruption required precision and patience. Inside the courtroom, the mood was different. Judge Worthington sat at the bench, sipping from his coffee cup like nothing had happened the day before. But there was something brittle about his expression. His eyes scanned the room sharply, lingering on every movement, every glance. He was a man who felt the walls tightening around him. Marcus entered with quiet authority, dressed in a navy blue suit that matched the weight of his presence. His client followed behind, shoulders stiff, but a spark of trust now burning in his eyes. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, his tone clipped, "I assume we're ready to continue without theatrics today." "Only if the court is ready to proceed without bias," Marcus replied smoothly. There was a pause, a tension so sharp it cut through the air. The judge tapped his gavel once. "Let's begin." The prosecution called their next witness, Detective Jared Collins. Marcus already knew this part of the script. Collins had a reputation for coercing confessions from vulnerable suspects, often without proper representation. He also had a long-standing friendship with Judge Worthington, a fact that had mysteriously never made it into the public record. Detective Collins, Assistant DA Marilyn Reyes, began. "Can you walk us through the night of the arrest?" Collins straightened his tie. We received a tip placing Keith Banner near the convenience store shortly before the robbery. When we arrived, he matched the description given by an eyewitness. Marcus leaned forward. Objection. The tip has not been documented, nor has the identity of the eyewitness been disclosed in any filing. This is hearsay, Your Honor. Worthington didn't even hesitate. Overruled. Marcus smiled faintly. Of course. He let the detective go on, speaking confidently about Keith's supposed nervous behavior, how he seemed agitated and resisted briefly. Marcus didn't stop him. Not yet. He needed the lies to stack high enough to be undeniable. When his turn came, Marcus walked slowly to the witness stand, his footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. Detective Collins, he said, did you file a complete transcript of your body cam footage for the night of the arrest? I submitted the footage as per protocol. Right? But did you submit the full unedited footage? Collins hesitated. Yes? Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. Then can you explain why this footage, obtained through a separate subpoena from the department's internal system, contains 6 extra minutes not included in your submission? The courtroom shifted. Even the judge blinked. I don't know what you're talking about, Collins stammered. I'll be happy to play it, Marcus said, handing it to the bailiff. The courtroom projector flickered to life. The video played, grainy but clear. It showed Collins approaching Keith, who stood calmly with his hands visible. Then came the voice, Collins. Just say it was you, kid. You don't want this to drag out. Louder gasps now. Even the jury shifted forward in their seats. Detective, Marcus said, voice calm but firm. Does this look like a voluntary confession to you? Collins swallowed hard. It was taken out of context. Marcus turned to the judge. Your Honor, I move to have this testimony stricken and a formal review of police conduct submitted to the court. Denied, Judge Worthington snapped. This isn't a political circus, Mr. Reed. You're right, Marcus said. It's supposed to be a courtroom, but right now it feels like something else entirely. Worthington slammed his gavel. You're walking a thin line. Marcus stepped back, eyes never leaving the judge. So are you. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Worthington looked ready to explode. I will hold you in contempt. Before he could finish, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. A woman in a gray suit walked in briskly. She carried a thin briefcase and moved with purpose. Excuse the interruption, Your Honor, she said. I'm Claire Donovan, Internal Affairs, Department of Justice. We have business with this court. Worthington paled. This is highly irregular. It's standard procedure when multiple allegations have been brought against an officer of the court, she said evenly. Marcus said nothing, just returned to his seat, calm, composed. Claire handed the judge a folder. We've received credible evidence of judicial misconduct and potential case tampering related to this courtroom. The gallery gasped. Even the jurors looked stunned. Worthington's hands trembled as he read the documents. This is absurd. No, Your Honor, Claire said. It's accountability. Marcus leaned toward Keith, whispering, This is just the beginning. Keith nodded slowly, the weight of hope finally landing where hopelessness had lived too long. Outside the courthouse, the news had already started spreading. But inside, the temperature shifted. A storm was building, and for once, it wasn't aimed at the man sitting at the defense table. It was aimed at the bench. And Judge Worthington knew it. Marcus Reed had faced off against corrupt judges before, but this case was turning into something much bigger than he anticipated. That moment in court when Claire Donovan from the DOJ strode in like a storm and dropped that bomb on Judge Worthington's bench, it changed everything, and Marcus knew he had to keep the momentum going. Back in his small office later that evening, the city buzzed outside the window, but Marcus barely noticed. His desk was covered in files, manila folders stacked like walls, each one holding a story just like Keith Banner's. And every one of them, at some point or another, had landed in Worthington's courtroom. He ran his finger along the spine of a folder marked Case 12B, Darrell Tate. Another young black man railroaded by Worthington 3 years ago, convicted based on flimsy evidence. Marcus had fought it, but lost. And now, maybe, just maybe, he could help make that right. The door opened behind him. His assistant, Jamal, poked his head in. Phone call. Claire Donovan. She says it's urgent. Marcus picked up the receiver. Donovan, we need to talk. Face to face, she said. Tonight. Can you meet me at the Federal Building in 20? He didn't hesitate. On my way. The Federal Building in downtown Memphis wasn't far. By the time Marcus arrived, Claire was already waiting in a secured room, sitting across from a laptop, papers spread out in front of her. Her face was unreadable. She motioned to the chair across from her. I've been digging deeper. Your instincts about Worthington, they weren't just right. They were scratching the surface. Marcus sat, tension tightening in his shoulders. What did you find? Claire tapped the laptop. Wire transfers, offshore accounts. He's been taking money from a private detention company called Oxbow Corrections. Every time he hands out a long sentence, especially to young black men, they get a new inmate, and they pay him for it. Marcus stared at her, jaw locked. How long? 8 years, she said, and it's not just him. At least 3 other judges in the state are linked. But Worthington is the keystone. He's been training young prosecutors, influencing jury selections, and orchestrating plea deals that never should have been approved. Marcus leaned back, breathing slowly, deliberately. This is a racket, he said. A damn industrial machine. Claire nodded. You know that motion you filed? The one he dismissed as theatrics? It triggered a review. And now, things are moving. But we'll need your cooperation. Marcus didn't blink. Whatever it takes. She slid a folder across the table. Tomorrow you go back into that courtroom. Pretend you know nothing about this. But we'll be watching. The next misstep he makes, it'll be the final nail. The next morning, Marcus returned to court with a new strategy. He wasn't just playing defense anymore, he was baiting a trap. Judge Worthington tried to reassert control the second Marcus stepped in. Mr. Reed, I hope you've come back to this courtroom ready to act like a real attorney. Marcus smiled faintly. That depends, Your Honor. Are you ready to act like a real judge? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Worthington's face turned crimson. One more word and I'll hold you in contempt. Then let's get it on the record, Marcus said, placing a flash drive on the clerk's desk. This contains a series of judicial rulings issued by Your Honor in the past year. Every one of them correlates with the sentencing disparity when the defendant is a person of color. The judge glared at him. This is outrageous. Marcus didn't flinch. What's outrageous is what's happening in your courtroom. The statistics speak for themselves, unless you'd like to explain why defendants with identical charges received 10-year sentences under you, but only probation under Judge Levinson across the hall. Worthington opened his mouth, then closed it. For a second, something cracked in his expression. But it wasn't fear. It was fury. You are dancing on the edge of a very dangerous line, Mr. Reed. Marcus met his gaze head-on. The only danger is letting people like you keep that robe. Another agent stepped into the gallery at that moment. Not Claire, someone else. Plain clothes, but clearly federal. Worthington noticed, and for the first time Marcus saw it. Panic. It flared behind the judge's eyes, a twitch in the corner of his mouth, a bead of sweat just beginning to form at the edge of his temple. Marcus pressed forward. "I move for dismissal," he said, "on the grounds that this trial has been irreparably compromised by judicial bias." Worthington stood from the bench, slamming his gavel down. "Motion denied," he barked, "and you're in contempt. Bailiff!" The bailiff hesitated. He looked at the agent in the gallery, then at Marcus, then at the judge. "Bailiff!" Worthington screamed, but no one moved. Claire Donovan stepped through the courtroom doors at that moment. "Judge Worthington," she said calmly, "you're going to want to sit down." He turned toward her, face wild. "This is my courtroom." "Not anymore." Behind her, two more agents entered, badges raised, and as Worthington opened his mouth to protest, Claire dropped a folder onto the bench in front of him. "These are federal charges, Judge. You're under investigation for racketeering, bribery, and civil rights violations." The gallery erupted in gasps. Marcus didn't speak. He just watched. Watched the man who had mocked him, threatened him, and ruled his courtroom like a kingdom now stand paralyzed by a justice system finally turning back on him. And this was just the beginning. The courtroom buzz hadn't died down from the previous day's shock. Word had already spread like wildfire through Memphis and beyond. Judge Worthington, the man whose rulings had ruined countless lives, was now at the center of a federal investigation. But even with the walls closing in, Marcus Reed knew the hardest part was still ahead. Inside his apartment, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, sleepless. The morning light filtered in through half-closed blinds, cutting across stacks of files and empty coffee cups. Across from him sat Tyrone Bennett, a former public defender who had worked under Marcus years ago before becoming disillusioned by the system and leaving the field altogether. "You're really going for it," Tyrone said, staring at the printed transcripts spread across the table. "There's no turning back," Marcus replied. "I've already put the blade to the truth. Now I've got to see it through." Tyrone exhaled. "You're gonna get hit. Hard. Worthington's connected. If he goes down, others will too. They won't go quietly. I'm counting on it." Marcus knew this wasn't just about one judge anymore. As Claire Donovan's investigation expanded, it became clear that Worthington was the linchpin in a much larger operation. Private prison contracts, dirty campaign money, corrupt prosecutors. The whole infrastructure had been feeding off injustice for years. That afternoon, Marcus met with Claire again, this time in a nondescript federal office downtown, away from cameras, away from prying eyes. "We've confirmed 8 more cases where Worthington either suppressed exculpatory evidence or ruled in direct violation of constitutional law," Claire said, sliding over a binder. "And that's just what we've found so far." Marcus flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. One name jumped out. Malik Jefferson. He tapped the page. "I remember this one. 19 years old. Caught with a joint and a busted tail light. Got 5 years. Claire nodded. Oxbow Corrections took him within a week. Marcus rubbed his temples. "You have enough to charge Worthington right now." "We do, but that's not the plan," she said. "We're going to bait him." He looked up. "We let him think the storm's past," Claire continued. "Let him go back to court. Let him get comfortable. You'll be there. You'll keep pushing. When he overreaches again, and he will, we hit him with everything." Marcus leaned back. "That's a dangerous game." "It's the only way to expose who else is involved." The next morning, court resumed. Worthington entered the courtroom as if nothing had happened. His robe swayed with the same arrogance, but his eyes darted more than usual. He saw Marcus and clenched his jaw. There was a silence, thick and heavy, as everyone waited to see how he'd proceed. "Let the record reflect that yesterday's disruption was unfortunate," Worthington said, sitting down. "But the court will not be derailed by distractions." Marcus stood. With all due respect, Your Honor, this is about more than distractions. It's about justice. Worthington pounded the gavel. You will not lecture this court. Marcus held his ground. Then let the court hear testimony from Jason Moore, one of your previous defendants. A hush fell. Jason Moore, handcuffed and dressed in prison blues, was led into the courtroom. His sentence had been handed down by Worthington 5 years earlier, 20 years for a nonviolent robbery. His appeal had been denied. On the stand, Jason's voice was shaky but determined. I was told to take the deal, he said. My lawyer said if I didn't, the judge would bury me. I had witnesses, an alibi, but it didn't matter. The judge wouldn't let any of them testify. Marcus paced slowly. Were you aware that Judge Worthington had financial ties to the private prison you were sent to? Jason blinked. Number I didn't even know that was possible. Worthington rose from the bench. That's enough. Mr. Moore's testimony is inadmissible. He's a convicted felon. Marcus turned sharply. Convicted in your courtroom, Your Honor, under your biased authority. How convenient. Worthington's face turned red. You are skating on the edge, Reed. Marcus didn't back down. Or maybe I'm just standing where you hoped no one ever would. At that moment, a courier entered the courtroom and handed a sealed envelope to the judge. Worthington's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, his face blanched. He looked up at Marcus, then at the gallery. Without saying a word, he stood and recessed the court. Marcus knew what had just happened. Claire had moved. The trap had been sprung. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward Marcus as camera flashes lit up the courthouse steps. Mr. Reed, is it true the DOJ is investigating multiple judges? Is Worthington going to be removed from the bench? Are more arrests coming? Marcus paused, looked directly at the cameras. We're just getting started. Back inside, Worthington sat alone in his chambers, staring at the letter Claire had sent. It wasn't a subpoena. Not yet. It was a courtesy. The last one he'd get. He tore the letter in half with shaking hands and reached for his phone. Not to call his attorney, but to call someone else. Someone higher up. Someone more dangerous. The web was larger than Marcus had guessed, and he had just rattled the center of it. The following week, Marcus Reed felt the tension closing in like a tightening noose. Something had shifted. Not just in Judge Worthington's demeanor, but in the silence of the courthouse itself. It was as if the building had grown ears, and those ears were listening to Marcus's every move. He kept his pace steady, his expression unreadable. But deep down, he knew the game had escalated. Claire had gone silent since the sealed envelope incident. That was intentional, part of the DOJ's strategy, but it left Marcus feeling exposed. The only signal he had that things were progressing behind the scenes was the increased surveillance. Unmarked cars lingering outside his apartment, phone calls that dropped too soon, even a strange man watching from across the street who ducked into a coffee shop when Marcus stared too long. He didn't tell anyone. Not Tyrone, not Jason Moore, not even Claire. Instead, he dug in deeper. That day's court session was supposed to be a continuation of Tyrone Will's retrial, a symbolic moment, really. The charges were weak, the evidence thinner than paper, but Worthington was clinging to the case like it was the last sandbag holding back a flood. Marcus stood at the defense table as the judge entered. Worthington didn't look at him. His face was pale, drawn. Whatever phone call he made after receiving Claire's letter had clearly not gone the way he hoped. The prosecution began presenting a new witness, a woman named Carla Hughes, who claimed to have seen Tyrone near the scene the night of the alleged robbery. Her testimony was oddly rehearsed, too confident. Marcus leaned in. Notice anything, he whispered to Tyrone. She won't look at me, Tyrone muttered. She's lying. Marcus stood. Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess so I can investigate new information related to this witness's identity. Worthington didn't even blink. Denied. Proceed with cross-examination or waive your right. Marcus nodded slowly. Then I'll proceed. He stepped forward, his hands folded behind his back. Miss Hughes, you stated under oath that you saw my client near the corner of Linden and Marshall Street on the night in question. I did. What were you doing there? I was walking home from work. And where do you work? She hesitated. At a diner on 12th. Marcus tilted his head. That's a 15-minute drive from Linden and Marshall. You walked? I was meeting someone halfway. Who? A pause. Just a friend. What's their name? I don't remember. Marcus turned to the jury. She doesn't remember the name of the friend she was supposedly meeting on the night she witnessed a felony. Objection, the prosecutor barked. Badgering. Sustained, Worthington snapped, but his voice cracked. Marcus walked calmly back to the table, pulled out a folder, and returned. Ms. Hughes, are you familiar with this man? He handed her a photo. Her hands trembled as she looked. No. That's interesting, because we have phone records showing you called him 5 times the night of the robbery. He's also an employee of Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. The gallery gasped. Worthington's hand jerked, but he stopped himself from speaking. I believe your testimony was coached, Ms. Hughes, coerced, possibly, and I'm filing a motion to subpoena all communications between you and Officer Ray Trenton. Now the courtroom was rumbling. The judge slammed his gavel. This is irrelevant, Worthington barked. Withdrawn. No, Your Honor. It's entirely relevant, Marcus said, voice rising, because this court has become a stage for manufactured justice, and I'm not going to let another innocent man rot in a cell for someone else's power play. Worthington stood, red-faced. Mr. Reed, you are dangerously close to contempt. Then I hope you brought cuffs, because I'm not stopping. Suddenly a voice echoed from the back of the courtroom. He's right. Everyone turned. It was a woman, older, black, dressed in a simple green cardigan. Her name was Mrs. Lenora Atkins. She'd been in court every day since her son's conviction 5 years earlier, another case ruled by Worthington. My boy is in prison because of that judge. He blocked evidence that would have cleared him. I begged the court. I begged you. She pointed directly at Worthington. Security began moving toward her, but the room erupted. 3 more voices joined in. Family members, former defendants, neighbors. They stood one by one, testifying not under oath, but under grief, shouting, crying. The gallery had transformed into a reckoning. And Worthington? He froze. For a man who wielded fear like a gavel, he suddenly looked small, cornered. Marcus stayed silent. He didn't need to speak. The people were doing it for him. Outside, Claire stood by the courthouse doors, watching through the glass. She didn't stop the chaos, didn't try to quiet the voices. She just whispered into her phone, "It's time." Back inside, Worthington banged his gavel again, trying to restore order. But no one was listening. The people had taken the courtroom back. And for the first time in decades, Judge Worthington wasn't in control. Marcus walked slowly back to his seat, locked eyes with the judge, and let the silence speak for itself. The tide had turned, but the storm wasn't over yet. The tension outside the Jefferson County Courthouse that morning was thicker than the Alabama heat. News vans lined the street, reporters with cameras and microphones clustered by the steps, waiting. Rumors had leaked, a sealed indictment, a federal sting, a judge under investigation. Inside, Marcus Reed sat in the defense chair with his back straight and his focus razor-sharp. He wasn't just there to defend Tyrone Wills anymore. He was there to blow the entire system wide open. Judge Worthington entered, noticeably paler than usual. His robe swayed stiffly as he took his seat, but he didn't meet Marcus's eyes. The courtroom had felt like his domain just a week ago. Today it felt like a trap. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. Worthington shuffled through papers, trying to look composed. "Mr. Reed," he said without inflection, "you may proceed with your next motion." Marcus stood, calm as ever. "Your Honor, before proceeding, I request the court recognize new evidence and testimony regarding past misconduct that directly impacts the integrity of this trial." Worthington's eyes finally lifted. "If this is another attempt to grandstand, I'll remind you that this courtroom is not a stage for political—" "It's not grandstanding," Marcus said evenly. "It's the law, and it's coming whether you recognize it or not." There was a hush in the courtroom. The gallery was packed. Families, former defendants, off-duty attorneys who'd once whispered about Worthington's bias but never dared speak publicly. And in the back row, Claire stood. She nodded subtly when Marcus glanced her way. Marcus turned to the side table and pulled out a thick folder. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a compilation of sealed case reviews, all previously presided over by Your Honor. The Justice Department has found irregularities in at least 13 of them, including suppression of exculpatory evidence, inappropriate ex parte communication with the prosecution, and consistent rulings against black defendants in cases with identical legal circumstances to white counterparts." Worthington sat back in his chair. "I object," the prosecutor stammered. "This is out of order. None of this is—" Marcus cut him off. "Order? You're worried about order. You sat here for weeks while a man was railroaded by a judge who never should have been on the bench to begin with." Worthington leaned forward, his face reddening. "You're treading dangerously close to contempt, Mr. Reed." "No," Marcus said quietly. "I'm standing in the truth." He handed the folder to the court clerk. Claire stepped forward next. She moved slowly, deliberately, holding her badge out for everyone to see. "Special Investigator Claire Monroe, Department of Justice. Your Honor, we've been monitoring this courtroom under a sealed warrant. Based on multiple complaints and our own findings, the DOJ has issued an emergency order to suspend Judge Worthington from his duties, effective immediately, pending investigation." Gasps echoed around the room. Worthington's jaw went slack. "You can't be serious," he barked. "This is absurd." Claire didn't flinch. "You'll have a chance to respond at your own hearing." Marcus stepped forward again, his voice low but steady. "Your Honor, you mocked me in this courtroom, dismissed my motions, threatened to hold me in contempt. But you made one mistake. You assumed I came in here alone." Worthington stood. "This is a circus. You're making a mockery of this court." "No," Marcus said, locking eyes with him. "You did that a long time ago." 2 federal agents entered from the side door. The courtroom held its breath. "Judge Everett Worthington," one agent said, "you're being placed on administrative suspension. You are not to rule or preside over any matters until further notice. Please step down from the bench." Worthington stared them down, then turned to Marcus. "You think this changes anything?" Marcus nodded once. "It already has." Worthington stood frozen for a moment longer, then slowly removed his robe. He handed it to the court clerk, his hands trembling. As he stepped down, the courtroom erupted, not in applause, but in hushed murmurs, tears, disbelief. The kind of silence that follows a storm when people realize it's finally over. Marcus looked over at Tyrone. The man's hands were still cuffed, but hope was blooming in his eyes. A new judge would be assigned within hours. The case would be reviewed from top to bottom. But Marcus knew this was the moment the tide had shifted. Not just for Tyrone, but for every name that had ever been buried beneath Worthington's gavel. Back outside, the crowd had grown larger. Reporters scrambled, people chanted, signs were raised. And through the courthouse doors, Marcus stepped out, no longer just an attorney, but the man who turned the tables. And he wasn't done yet. The courthouse felt like a different building the next morning. Gone was the oppressive air that had hung over Judge Worthington's courtroom like smoke. The hallways buzzed with speculation, but also something new: hope. People lingered longer in the lobby, made eye contact, nodded to one another like survivors in a war-torn city just beginning to see sunlight. Marcus Reed stood outside courtroom 3B, straightening his tie. His phone buzzed in his pocket for the 5th time in a minute. News outlets, former clients, civil rights organizations. He ignored them all. This morning wasn't about press or vindication. It was about finishing what he started. Tyrone Wills stood beside him, wearing the same gray suit from day one. Still no cuffs on his wrists, still silent, thoughtful. The weight of the last few days hadn't left his face, but something else had replaced the exhaustion. Clarity. "You ready?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Tyrone gave a small nod. "I've never been more ready." The door opened and the new judge stepped out. A woman this time. African-American, mid-50s, with silver streaks in her coiled hair and a presence that didn't demand respect so much as invited it. Her nameplate read, Judge Loretta Ellison. "I see both parties are here," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "Let's not waste time." Inside the courtroom, the crowd was lighter than the day before, but no less attentive. Claire Monroe sat near the front, flanked by 2 other DOJ officials. The prosecution table was noticeably quieter. Assistant DA James Vernon, who had once puffed his chest beside Worthington, now looked 10 years older, his confidence worn thin. Judge Ellison opened the proceedings calmly. "We are reconvening to consider a motion to dismiss all charges against Tyrone Wills on grounds of prosecutorial misconduct and judicial bias in the original trial. Mr. Reed, you may proceed." Marcus stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, the evidence submitted shows a consistent pattern of suppression and manipulation under Judge Worthington's supervision. From the selective admission of testimony to the refusal to consider exculpatory material, the integrity of this trial was corrupted from the outset." He paused to look directly at the jury box, empty today but symbolically present. This wasn't just a miscarriage of justice. It was a systemic targeting of a man who never stood a chance. Judge Ellison turned to the prosecution. "Mr. Vernon?" Vernon cleared his throat, standing with difficulty. "Your Honor, while we do not dispute the findings of the Department of Justice, we ask that the court consider a retrial with a new judge and fair parameters." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Your Honor, the prosecution wants another swing at a man who's already lost years of his life under a rigged system. That's not justice. That's saving face." The courtroom held its breath. Then Judge Ellison leaned forward. "I've reviewed the transcripts. I've read the DOJ's reports. I've even spoken privately with the Office of Judicial Conduct. This case is a stain on everything this court stands for." She lifted her gavel slowly. "And I won't let it continue." Marcus tensed. "Tyrone Wills," she said clearly, "the charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice. You are a free man." The courtroom didn't erupt. It inhaled, the kind of silence that hits just before emotion breaks loose. Tyrone turned, visibly shaking. Marcus stood motionless as Tyrone dropped his head into his hands, overwhelmed. Claire wiped her eyes. Even one of the court officers clenched his jaw, blinking back something he wasn't used to feeling in that building: relief. As the gavel dropped, Judge Ellison added, "Mr. Reed, the court commends you for your diligence, your integrity, and your courage. But let's be clear, your work has just begun." Outside, the cameras waited, Reporters shouted questions the second Marcus and Tyrone stepped into the sunlight. Marcus raised one hand, signaling quiet. "My client was innocent," he said plainly, "and justice, delayed though it was, has finally arrived." A reporter shouted, "Is Judge Worthington going to face criminal charges?" Marcus didn't smile, but his voice tightened with purpose. "Let's just say the tables have turned, and we're not done setting them." Tyrone stepped up beside him, cleared his throat. "For every person who never had someone to fight for them, we see you. We're coming for the truth." And just like that, two men walked down those steps, not just as attorney and client, but as a signal that maybe, just maybe, the system could be made to work. Not easily, not often, but when someone stands tall, even the walls of a courthouse can crack. 3 weeks after the courthouse eruption, the storm hadn't quieted. It had only shifted. News stations replayed the footage of Judge Worthington being escorted out in cuffs like a political ad on a loop. The Department of Justice confirmed a full investigation into her previous rulings. 37 past cases had already been flagged for review, and in each one a common thread had emerged: bias, manipulation, and abuse of power. But inside a small community center on the south side of Atlanta, Marcus Reed stood quietly, not behind a podium, not in front of a camera, but before a room full of high school students and community members who had gathered to hear from the man who flipped the script. He wasn't in a suit, no tie, just a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, the kind of outfit you wear when you're not trying to impress, just connect. "I didn't become a lawyer because I thought the system worked," he said, his voice even, yet heavy with truth. "I became a lawyer because I knew it didn't." The crowd leaned in. Some nodded. Others just stared, eyes wide, absorbing every word. I've watched people like Tyrone Wills get chewed up and spit out by a system that was never designed to protect them. And I've watched people like Judge Worthington make a career out of pretending that justice was colorblind. He paused, letting the silence grow thick. But we proved something this month. Not just that one man could win a case, not just that one corrupt judge could fall. We proved that the truth doesn't stay buried forever. We proved that if you push hard enough, the system can crack. From the back of the room, a hand went up. A teenage girl, maybe 16, eyes sharp and voice steady. "But what if you're not a lawyer? What if you don't have power?" Marcus smiled softly. "Then you find someone who does. You tell your story. You show up, even when you think nobody cares. And you keep showing up. That's where change starts. Not in a courtroom, not in Washington, but right here, in rooms like this." After the talk, as the room emptied, Tyrone Wills stepped up beside Marcus. He wore a white t-shirt that said, "Free Indeed," across the front. "You ever think," Tyrone said, "that we're just two guys who got lucky?" Marcus looked at him. I think we're two guys who didn't give up." They walked outside, the air crisp with spring. Across the street, a mural had been painted overnight, Judge Worthington's name crossed out, and beneath it the words, "Power belongs to the people." It wasn't just street art. It was a message. Later that night, Marcus sat in his modest office, surrounded by case files. Tyrone's was closed now, resting quietly at the top of the stack. But under it, names, dozens of them, each one waiting, each one hoping. His phone buzzed, a new message, this time from someone he didn't know, a woman in Alabama. Her son had been sentenced unfairly. She saw his story online. She believed he was the only one who might help. Marcus picked up the phone, dialed back. As it rang, he looked at the photo pinned to the wall, him and Tyrone outside the courthouse, fists raised not in victory, but in promise. Because justice didn't end with Judge Worthington. That was just the beginning. So if you're still watching, if you followed this story all the way to this moment, don't let it stop here. Share this video. Talk about it. Let people know that fighting back isn't impossible. And if you believe that every person deserves a fair shot, no matter their color or background, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to this channel. Because together we're not just telling stories. We're rewriting what justice looks like. And we've only just begun.